The first time I worked in education, I was 7 years old. Nobody had hired me. I was just doing what my mama had told me to do. And I was translating between her and my brother's kindergarten teacher. I remember being in that room, looking at the shapes and translating them into Spanish. Let my mom know everything my brother knew and didn't know. Yep, I remember hating it, but that was life. Welcome to the Veteran Teacher Files. I'm your host, the Dragon Lady. This podcast is anonymous for obvious reasons because education's a really small world held together by copier, toner, staff meetings, and collective survival skills. I spent over 20 years in classrooms, intervention systems, dual immersion programs, charter schools, coaching roles, and everything in between. So, for this first episode, I thought I'd give you a little bit of a background, my origin story as to how I got here. So let's start back in the 80s with the little translator kid. So yeah, back then my neighborhood needed a lot of translators. We had a big boom of immigration like we always do in different places around the country, and it was our turn. And I knew Spanish. We had a lot of Spanish speakers, and it was a skill that I had acquired and gotten pretty good at. Like I said, my mom didn't know English then. My mom still doesn't know English now. So, survival skills. I remember being asked to translate in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. Some years were great. Some years were terrible. I always preferred when I had to translate for the girls. 3rd graders, I want to translate for the boys. But yeah, I just always ended up at that table where somebody needed translating. Anyways, it was around that time in elementary school that I had this 3rd grade teacher who had given us this busy worksheet. It was towards the end of the school year. She was probably cleaning out her own files or taking down papers, I forget. But one of the questions on the worksheet was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I remember looking at that question and being like, I don't know. So I walked up to her and I asked her, I told her, I was like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So she looked at me and she asked me, she's like, well, what are you good at? So I took a second and thought about it and was like, everything. So she laughed and she's like, well, then you should be a teacher. And I don't think she knew how seriously I had taken that to heart because my life was like, noted. And I took it and ran with it. And yeah, that's kind of what happened. So during my 4 years of high school, during those 4 years, I was a TA once or twice. I remember tutoring for kids in my neighborhood. I'd been a Kumon tutor. Babysitting. I was a Special Olympics coach. And yeah, as soon as I had my first 12 units before I got fully credentialed, those first 12 units my freshman year of college was good enough to get my foot in the door. So I started working at a Montessori school. I worked at a kindercare. I used to drive the pickup and the drop-off bus for kindercare. And I worked at this other daycare that was a special needs daycare because at the time I thought I wanted to be a special needs, special education teacher. So I was working there, and yeah, I just was following education around like a little lost puppy. So anyways, I did attend a university. I did get my teaching degree, my teaching credential, and I started teaching 4th grade. Let me roll it back. I started my student teaching 4th grade in a dual immersion site. So that was a lot of fun. I did that while I was earning my B-Cloud credential. My B-Cloud is what lets me teach in Spanish. So let me tell you a little bit about my first actual teaching job. My first teaching job was 2 weeks into the school year. I can't remember how many interviews I'd been on that summer, but I am a terrible interviewee. I have very high anxiety. I have a lot of self-doubt. And I think that first year, like a lot of first-year teachers, I was like, I don't really have any experience. Even though I'd had all this experience already, like I'd shared with you, I still didn't think I was good enough. Kind of that imposter syndrome. So anyways, I finally get hired. It's 2 weeks into the school year. I get placed into a pair classroom, and I have 13 kids on my roster. Great. It's a K1 combo. It is a bilingual school, which means I have Spanish-speaking students learning English. But because it's the overflow classroom, I just have everybody. Doesn't matter if you're learning English. I mean, everyone's learning English. Doesn't matter if you're a native Spanish speaker or if you're English only. I had everybody in this class. Like I said, I had 13 students to begin with. At the end, I ended up with 24. And that year, I had 17 kids cycle through that class. So if it sounds crazy, It was crazy. On top of that, that same year, I was earning my master's degree in education. And to my surprise, I'd signed on to work for a district that was in talks to merge with a couple other districts to create a mega district. So 3 years after working there, I got laid off because of seniority. Yeah, they did it. They created this mega district, and a whole bunch of us, not just myself, got laid off due to seniority. So that really hurt. And that's kind of when I figured out how unstable education can be, no matter how good you're getting at it or how good you are at it. So that kind of sent me packing back to my hometown. And there I joined an independent charter school. And at that time, I'd heard of charter schools. I kind of knew what charter schools were, but I didn't really know how charter schools worked or what they really, really were. So that was educational. At that site, I taught kinder, K1, and first grade. I was considered one of their founding teachers because I came in their third year of operation. They've now been open for almost 20 years. When I left that site, I went to a school that had been open for over 100 years. I was only at that school for 1 year, but I went there to help them launch their dual immersion. Like I said, that school had been there for over 100 years. The demographics had changed. And so now they were in need of opening, or they saw a need to open a dual immersion strand on their campus. So I was there. I was their first third grade dual immersion teacher. And yeah, unfortunately, I was on there for a year. Then I relocated. And when I relocated, I moved to a very, very low income, sketchy area. But I taught a very high, very well-to-do area. And those years were a lot of fun. I learned a lot about myself just as a person those years. I taught sixth grade, middle school model. So I had them for 55-minute periods. And I gotta say, I really liked it. But then I had a chance to go back to first grade. And after being away from first grade for a little bit, I wanted to go back to it. And going back to teach first grade now in English after having done it at the beginning of my career, so over 10 years later now, was interesting. I felt like I'd come full circle. I felt like I had knowledge to actually apply to my work, and it was really enjoyable. Anyways, during that time, I earned my admin credential. And I met a friend who called me up one day and was like, hey, my district is hiring instructional coaches like crazy. We're hiring like 50 of them. And they did, close to 50. They hired like 42 or something, and I was one of them. So I jumped this district where I was at, and I went to another district to become an instructional coach. But then COVID hit, so I went into the classroom for just one more year as a virtual TK teacher. And then after that, I got on with my instructional coaching. And these last 2 years, I have been a literacy coordinator for a TK-12 school. So I will give you details on a lot of those grades and a lot of those stories and a lot of those schools, but I just want to give you a quick rundown of where I've been. Let me tell you a little bit about this podcast. So this podcast didn't actually start with me. This podcast started with my husband. He comes from an educational family. His stepfather was a high school principal. His mother worked in schools. His grandmother worked in schools and universities. She was a really smart lady. But my husband went through parochial schools here. And when we started dating, I was like, what do you mean? We're talking about our future kids someday if we ever have kids and blah, blah, blah. And he's telling me how he's going to send them to private school. And I'm like, what? Record scratch. Like, heck no, our kids are going to public. Like, I've always been a public school teacher. Like, duh. And, that was the biggest argument we'd had while we were dating. And now I understand his point of view, and I think he understands mine. So over the years that we've been together, he's come home and I've shared stories with him of things that have happened at school. Sometimes I explain to him why things happen at school when he sees something on the news. And just kind of over time, he started suggesting more and more that I should start this podcast because I have a lot of knowledge and I have a lot of stories, and people need to know these things because, like I said, and I think a lot of us know this already, when we leave the field, we leave with our knowledge with us. A lot of us don't have the opportunity to share the knowledge that we have. And some of that knowledge could be curriculum-based, it can be stories-based, and some of it's just experience. Like, this is the reality behind the work that we're doing. So anyways, this podcast was my husband's idea, so thanks, babe. And this is the result of my 20 plus years in education. So, in closing, I've worked in high-performing schools, struggling schools, dual immersion programs, charter schools, intervention systems, and pandemic classrooms. And if I've learned anything, it's that veteran teachers carry a lot of information with them. So, this podcast is my opportunity to share my information with you. This has been the Veteran Teacher Files. I'm the Dragon Lady. Protect your prep period. Trust your instincts. And remember, somewhere out there, a veteran teacher just solved a crisis with a sticky note and a glue stick. See you next time.